Secretary of State John Kerry holding his second day of talks with his Russian counterpart over how to remove and destroy Syria's chemical weapons. Secretary Kerry made a statement just a short time ago calling the talks productive and saying the U.S. and Russia will meet again on Syria later this month. So let's talk about the prospects here with KT McFarland, a Fox News national security analyst. The Secretary of State is saying, KT, that the military option remains on the table, and he suggests that it was only the credible use of force, or the threat of the credible use of force, from the Obama administration that brought the Russians and the Syrians to the bargaining table. What do you think about all that?
Well, I think that gave the Russians an opportunity to seize the initiative. What I think has happened is that President Obama put himself in a box to talk about a Syrian strike that the American people don't want, that is unlikely to succeed. So what happened is that Putin threw him a lifeline to say, here's your way out. Well, that lifeline has come at a very high price, as we are now seeing in Geneva, and we will see 2 weeks from now in New York when they meet again. What's that price? That Russia now will become the dominant power in the Middle East. It's been the United States for the last 40 years. It will now, going forward, be Russia. Russia's the only country that can deliver this destruction of the chemical weapons in Syria. But, John, I think what's really important is to look for the next 2 or 3 steps down the road. What's likely to happen as a result of Russia being the dominant power in the Middle East? Well, something nobody noticed this last week with all the diplomatic flurry was that the Russians are going to meet with the new Iranian president. And apparently what the Russians are going to do is offer to deliver to him something called the S-300. It's the state-of-the-art missile defense system. Well, once Iran has that, it will become invulnerable to any kind of an Israeli attack. So if you step it down the road, what it means is Iran will basically, unless the United States stops them, Iran will be a nuclear weapons state. I think if you look again, next step down the road, what's Russia likely to demand? That Israel give up its nuclear weapons, which it doesn't claim that it has, but everyone knows that it has. And so I think what will happen in the next several weeks and down the road is war in the Middle East, Arab-Israeli war in the Middle East, will become far more likely than it ever has before. We've had 40 years of peace. I think that's about to come to an end.
All of this triggered in part over this one chemical weapons attack or the use of chemical weapons by Bashar Assad?
Yeah, because look what the Russians have demanded, and certainly in that New York Times editorial, which isn't an editorial, it's propaganda. What they seem to have demanded is a couple of things. One, that if there is a deal with Syria, the United States has to forswear that any kind of an attack against Syria. What the Syrians have come out and said is, well, if we agree to a deal, Israel has to give up its nuclear weapons. What they've also talked about, as I said, is the Iranians will be able to have this missile defense system to make themselves invulnerable. So there are real consequences, but the biggest consequence of all of this, again, looking down the road, several years down the road, is that Russia, combined with the Arab oil-producing states, is the majority of the world's exported oil. If Russia's the dominant power in the Middle East, Russia, in concert with these Arab oil-producing states, really has its ability to control the world economy through the world's energy. And it's so unnecessary, John.
One of the ironies here is that a president who was swept into office in large part on his opposition to the Iraq War, who won the Nobel Peace Prize early in his administration, is now saying that only the threat of force, the credible use of basically an act of war, is what's bringing the Syrians to the peace talks.
And I think he's a president who is likely to, by the time he leaves office with maybe a nuclear Iran, a nuclear Middle East, or even another Arab-Israeli war in the Middle East. So he's not a peacemaker. He's a man who has gone against President Reagan's dictum that only through strength do we keep peace, and when we look weak, we invite aggression.
Trust but verify, Reagan said of the Soviets. We'll see if anybody verifies what the Russians are up to these days. KT McFarland, thank you.
Thanks, John.